let's edit this out. I'm saying a lot of that. Connor, just leave all these
Connor,
in so people
leave
can
them
see.
all in. Yeah.
Yeah. So people can say, oh, they're actually working through imposter syndrome on the podcast that they're talking about imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
This is so meta.
Not everyone has an editor. So this might be the easiest show for Connor, just to sit back and go,
that's right.
I'm not touching
I'm just going to let this whole thing happen. Hey there. If you've joined the podcast today, my name is Chris Jarvis. I work with companies on employee giving and volunteering programs.
And my name's Jake McIsaac. I spend a lot of time thinking about public safety and restorative justice.
So we are having conversations here that we've been having for 20 years.
Yeah, the only difference now is we press record and share it with you.
Thanks for joining us. On today's episode, we're going to talk about how Jake admits he is a big fraud.
I'm not sure I said it exactly that way.
You said something like that. You said, I'm an imposter. I shouldn't be up here. Everybody knows it. You even knew it.
Yeah, okay. Now you're right. I'm a fraud.
And everybody listening might feel the same way. So we're going to work through this. What does it mean to feel like an imposter? What can you do about it? And is it equally felt by everybody?
I've got a confession, maybe 5 years in the making. Should I just tell you? Maybe you can help me work it out.
Okay, if you don't mind. There's a few people who are going to listen in. So, but I'm all ears.
Well, and hopefully those people tell other people and share and get other people to subscribe. And anyway,
okay.
So here it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here we go.
See what
5 years, 5 year confession.
I went to a coffee shop I visit fairly regularly. And the first time, they take my name to write it on the cup and make my sandwich, and we're just chit-chatting, and it seems fine. I get the cup. I will look at the cup as I walk away. I didn't really hear them call my name, and It said Zach.
Zach. Okay.
Zach. Okay, cool.
You could be a Zach.
I could be a Zach. So the next day, don't they remember me? And they don't ask me my name, and they write Zach. And they interact. And now, 5 years in, I don't know how to correct this. So I have gone deep in this now.
Oh, no.
I've taken people there and said, in line, so weird things about to happen. They're going to call me Zach. Just go with it. Just go with it. And you know why?
Man.
The person who I interact with, she really leans in and commits. So she has now introduced me to other coworkers as Zach.
Oh, no.
She says, oh, he's busy. Let's make sure he gets in and out today. Here's his order. And there's this friendly vibe. And the banter has existed for many years. I got to this place where I'm like, I don't want to embarrass her at all.
Right. Of course.
Right. So I'm stuck. But that's not my name. I feel like a fraud. Can you help? What do you suggest?
Oh, me?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah. You need to go to the driver's license bureau.
Right away. Just change it.
Right away. Just go legally change your name. It is not worth it. It is easier for you to share on social media. I'm now going to identify as Zach. Then go to that poor barista and say, I
have lied. I have lied.
And you didn't even lie. You just let them go with a misunderstanding so long that they believe it's absolutely 100% the truth.
But here's the problem with it.
Okay.
They know a few things about me that are true. That is true.
Okay.
Right? So kind of knows the work I do. We have conversations. Over the years has picked up enough about me that I'm like, well, it's not all a lie.
Oh, man.
Just my name.
The name. Yep.
Everything else has been true.
Yep.
And I feel like a complete fraud every time I go in. And now I make other people complicit. But it's not the only time. It's not the only time I felt like that. And I wanted to sort of raise that. And I was doing a workshop last week in front of, 50, 60 people, a 3-day training session. And
what was the topic?
It was about restorative justice. Yeah.
Okay.
And we were kind of leading, but do you ever have this moment? I know you do a lot of public speaking as well, where you're kind of talking, you can see the room, but I also kind of saw myself in the back of the room looking at,
Mm,
right? And I'm like, had this weird
yeah,
moment where
yeah,
I start heckling myself in my
yeah.
head, like, shut up. Who are you to be doing this?
Oh,
Who are
no.
you? You feel like, and everything, I'm trying to stay focused and I'm feeling like a fraud because I've got this weird moment where people are looking at me like I'm supposed to have the answer.
Right.
And I'm trying to be confident and I'm trying to say it and stick the answer. But inside, I am being betrayed all the time by this little voice. Does that
Yeah.
ever happen?
I it yeah, with new material, definitely, like, when I get up to speak about diversity, equity, inclusion, and I've done some, weirdly, and I say weirdly because this does resonate in this space, discussions about diversity in supply chain,
Right.
um, and I'm not a supply chain person. Like, you would not want me to manage, oversee, or speak into your supply chain.
Right.
But on the topic of how do we bring more diversity into our supply chain locally, well, there's some angles there that I feel I could speak to. So when I was in Portland a couple of weeks ago, speaking to the city of Portland on this topic, not the entire city, just a room of about 20 or 30 people, I just sort of admitted it.
Mm.
I got up there and I said, "Well, here's what I know about. Here's what I do not know about." So you're going to have to do some work to connect the dots between these values or principles and how they're applied. But that's quite different than your, because
Yes.
you're perceived in the province as a leading thinker,
Yeah.
if not voice, based on your past experience on this topic. So it's a little bit different, and how did you resolve it? How did you get rid of Jake the heckler at the back of the
Well,
room?
I think I just try to tune it out, but it's like it's always there, right? It's like
Right.
self-doubt. And
Right.
I don't know that other people are thinking that. And you're right, it is a little bit different because in this space and in this work, I do know what I'm talking about.
Right. Of course you do.
And
Yeah.
so other people think that, and then I start to feel like an imposter.
Right. Okay.
So
That
there's this weird shift for me that I'm like talking to myself saying, "No, you actually do. Steady up. You know
yeah.
this."
Yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know. It's a bit different, but still the
It is
fraud feeling.
it's still that imposter syndrome thing, which you've mentioned to me before, but it is an interesting concept because as people who listen to this podcast on a regular basis know, I often mention the almost 180 biases that human beings use in their quick thinking or fast thinking process, which is about 95% of your decisions a day based on the best research we have in neuroscience. We're all using shortcuts
Mhm.
to make sense of the world because there's four problems. There's too much information. We don't know what information we should pay attention to. We can't remember all the information. And finally, we need to act fast. So those are the four things that on an evolutionary basis are why human beings have resorted to shortcuts. And then those have passed on generationally. So now all human beings have these very similar biases that look different based on your social constructs and your culture and where you're born and when you're born, for example. But this one of imposter syndrome is a bias that all human beings have, and it plays out differently, and we notice it in different places. But it is interesting, to consider how, the sort of the difference, and I suppose this is where it makes sense to go, but the sort of the difference between when I, in a dominant group, again, for listeners who can't see me, I'm 53, white, and very good looking. And,
Sorry, that wasn't sorry. We can edit that
can we
out because
can we leave
that
it in?
laugh got
Come
there
on,
real
let's leave
quick,
that in.
and that's
Let's leave
not
that in.
I was laughing
Oh.
about something else. Sorry, keep going.
Okay. And here's a clean edit. So, it plays out in my life a little bit differently, I would think, than it might play out in your life. So does do those two things collide in your, because everybody deals with imposter syndrome. Everybody's in a situation where you're speaking at the edge of your knowledge. People are listening. You're kind of like, do I know what I'm talking about? I do know what I'm talking about. You have the self-doubt. It's this little bias in our head. We all have it. But if you were in a room speaking to a bunch of white individuals, Maybe that's not a factor. Maybe it doesn't play differently. And if it did, maybe you wouldn't know because you're just you and I'm me, and we can't live each other's experience.
Well, I think it probably does play out. I think there's one part that you said about imposter syndrome, and I think we can put in the show notes. There's sort of lots of debate and pushback around pathologizing this as an individual problem, right?
You might have to unpack so what does that mean?
So uh, uh,
Pathologizing this as an
so
individual's.
that we call it a syndrome, that it's something wrong, it's something that can be fixed, it's something that you have to attend to, that it's a deficiency or an issue for you as a person. And so when they started to think about imposter experiences, mid 70s or so, by comparing high performing, usually female identified folks against male counterparts. So these were academics, athletes,
Okay.
people who had achieved at a high level,
Okay.
had accomplished all the same things that their male identified counterparts had accomplished, and
Right.
started asking folks, so how do you feel about those accomplishments? Do you feel like you've done enough? There was an overwhelming sense of insecurity, depression, self-doubt, right? So some of these
Right.
things.
Right.
And so in thinking about, well, how do you fix that? That's a you problem. When actually the study itself betrays some of the structural problems. If you're comparing women to men, they have, evolved that study to say, oh, I guess we all feel that way, not just women.
Right. Yeah, which is why it's considered a universally shared bias.
But I wonder if that lets us off the hook too easily by saying, oh, so we all experience it then. What if there is something to be paying attention to, the systems and structures around us that contribute to it? And so, if the experiences of historically marginalized people, particularly in workforces, it's not enough to just say to the Black colleague, oh, you got to get over that. You just got to get a little bit more
Oh, yeah,
confidence,
I see.
right?
Yes,
So,
yes, of
so
course.
is it a when you pathologize it, is it a me
Mhm.
issue to get over,
Mhm.
or is it an us thing to solve together?
Could you see it as based on what you've read, and I haven't, just for everybody listening, I haven't read those, that research, so I'm going to
So we'll
do
put it in
that
the show
when it's in
notes.
the show notes, yeah.
Yep.
Um, Based on what you have read, would you say this is a similar okay, so it's a universal human experience because we share a common ancestor, whether you're
Mhm, mhm.
visibly marginalized. These are all constructs that we've created as a species. They're not natural
Right.
in a sense. They're only natural in that we've institutionalized these biases and preferences as part of the evolutionary track of surviving as a species. And those parts, interestingly, there's sort of a neural systemizing of a bias across people groups. But you're right. Even though we all have it, it affects different groups differently. So there's sort of an angle of yes, it's a shared human experience, but like other shared human experiences, it plays out quite differently
That's it.
in
That's it
historically
exactly.
marginalized communities, right? So while I might deal with it occasionally on a topic or a new conversation, I don't deal with it in terms of me standing here as a person.
Right.
Right? I think I did when I began to work in this field and nobody knew who I was or where I came from or what my were my
Mhm.
credentials. I think there
Right.
that's about
Yeah.
as close as I can get for a short period of time, and then that goes away. But you can't change the color of your skin, so you've got that added dimension of, okay, this person's from outside of our visible group because, again, that's based on a whole bunch of biases, standing talking to us about this, but you bring in there's sort of an extra level of imposter syndrome that comes with just being in the group that you're in.
Well, people are looking and then they say, well, do you really, maybe they feel like, maybe the other part is everyone feels like you should know.
Oh, yeah.
And in
That's
your head,
yes.
you're saying you
Mhm.
should know. I could look at all the indicators that they are seeing, and we should see the same thing. But how come I'm not there? How come I'm
Right.
still being betrayed by the voice in my head?
Right.
Right. So it's an interesting challenge, I think, for us to be paying attention to sometimes presentations of the people around us. It's not that we have to diagnose them as, well, maybe you're having an imposter experience, but maybe it's hard. Maybe there are things happening that you just don't understand, never will understand, and we have to constantly find ways, I think, to make people um, comfortable in their processing.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you just said. I think that analysis is correct. And the word that came to my mind, enabling me to think about it differently. And I want to get also to the negative side of imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
especially with historically marginalized groups and how that can be leveraged easily
Yeah.
and maybe even unwittingly in a moment by
Okay.
the dominant group. Okay, so we'll come back to that in a second. But it seems to me that the word here that could be used is, well, we need to just accommodate. What was the word? What
Mm.
was the word that was used negatively? It wasn't meant to be negative, but preferential treatment for historically marginalized groups. What was that called? That was called
Like the
affirmative
affirmative
action.
action. Yeah.
Right. So affirmative action took on this negative connotation of we need to give weak people an excuse. They can't make it on their own. Right. That if they could have, they'd be running this country. I mean, that's the extreme MAGA
Yeah.
perspective in this
Right.
country and in Canada, because there's a lot of MAGAs in Canada. But the word isn't accommodate, facilitate, make exceptions for, give a step up, yada, yada. To me, the word that came to my mind when you were sharing your explanation was just one of grace. Just
Yeah.
having enough grace in the moment to think this person is presenting. I wonder if this is taking place. I'm not going to say it is. I'm not going to say that they're struggling with it or whatever, but I am gracious enough to lend some of my white privilege in
Mhm.
the moment to affirm the person. And not to think of it as affirmative action, but just to think of it as being a gracious human being to another person from an informed perspective of this may be happening. I don't know what it is. It doesn't even need to be for me to take this action and just be positive about the presentation. I don't Is that too simplistic? Does that
No, no,
whitewash it? Just
I don't think it does at all. In fact, I think it tracks along a very human-centered approach to supporting folks, to seeing people as humans first, role
yeah,
second, expertise second, looking past titles, which isn't always easy because those are the things that we have been socialized to look for, to
right,
hold up as expert. But I think it's very close to how I would, part of this training that I was doing is talking to restorative justice practitioners about trauma, at least in one part of the training. And it is consistent with a trauma informed approach to say, instead of asking, God, what's wrong with that person?
right,
When you're seeing this presentation, it's not what's wrong, it's what's happening for them.
right,
And I wonder what they
right,
need. I
right.
wonder how I can help.
That's hard to do in a presentation because you're kind of don't you feel
You're
like
drawn in.
I'm giving you my time, I'm sitting
Yeah.
here listening, so you better step up. Because I'm not how does that the
Well,
audience's expectations fit in?
I think it's a little bit different as we're talking about an imposter experience because it's almost invisible. There aren't very many presentations in that
Oh,
moment, right?
yeah,
So it's
yeah,
invisible, but it
yeah.
might come across as a sustained experience for that person, looking like depression. Are they going to stop coming to work? Are they going to stop showing up? So you
Oh,
come in
so
with
after that
afters, right?
presentation
So you're coming in with less confidence. The person that you thought was
mm,
just, man, you're going to kill it. You're going to get up there,
mm,
and we hype people up and we
mhm,
tell them they're going to be great, and then they feel like they can't live up to the expectation. So now there's
mhm,
this pressure. Did I let everyone down? Did they
mhm.
think it was as bad as it was? Even when people come up and say, "Hey, that was great," you're like, "Are you just being nice?" So it is hard to get out of your head,
It is, yeah.
right? And so I wonder,
Yeah.
this is why it's easy to put it on the person and say,
Oh, yeah, just say, "Pull yourself up by your
"Pull it
bootstraps
up.
and figure it out," right?
It's a
Yeah.
syndrome." Yeah, it's something you need to deal with. I'm going to diagnose you as the thing that you're struggling with, and when you get that under control, you'll be back.
Okay, so how would, so some, folks on our team are people of historically marginalized groups,
Mhm.
and we ask people to give presentations all the time just so
Yeah.
that they are competent and they can speak to clients and they can and I've thought about the shared experience of imposter syndrome and how we all struggle with it. And some folks on our team have it really bad. They get very nervous. Public speaking is not their thing. doesn't matter how well they do, at the end of it, they're always gonna think, "Oh," just because 'cause they're not confident in their own abilities, they don't have as much experience, it's the first time, that kind of thing. How do I and I have to say, Jake, in these conversations, I find I'm asking you questions like, "You're black, so you know." That's not why, just for the audience, just so you know, Jake does a lot of thinking about this, and since he's jumped into this on a deep level, I'm literally asking these questions because I wanna learn, and, the fact that you're black is almost, like a
Well, we have a relationship, right? So that's the difference.
mhm, yeah,
The
okay,
container for these conversations is held in our relationship and care for each other, wanting to see each other do well and learn
yeah.
and grow. And I think that that community piece it does transcend, doesn't erase, but it transcends some of those fears that would be just the black colleague down the hall. Hey,
Right,
listen,
okay,
yeah, let
so,
me pop in. I got a question for you.
yeah, yeah, okay,
Don't, yeah,
okay,
don't do that.
good. So, given what you know from your research on this topic, how do I address the white colleague who is terrified and wants to throw up after it's over every time, and the black colleague who seems fine? But I know we all deal with imposter syndrome. I know she doesn't present all the time. I know these are the things that are happening. So when he's there doing this,
Mhm.
how do I approach it? The same way as I would the other person, just say, "Hey, listen, that was great. Is there a difference in approach, or is it the same? And I just need to be open and think about the word grace and what I would want in this moment."
Well, I mean, I think there's a practical piece too, particularly on your team. I certainly don't love following you in a presentation. So if I mean, you're a dynamic speaker, you do really great things. People love you. Like you're a closer. Uh, I'm an opener, and so
Shut up!
so.
Shut up!
But
Keep going.
I
Shut up!
do
Say
think
more.
I do think that people would naturally be intimidated in a space where they had to present, where there were really capable folks. I think there are some ways to address it preemptively is to ask people, what will you need to make sure this goes well? What do you think you're going to need? Could it be a change in the order? Is it different types of feedback? How will you asking folks? How will you be evaluating yourself? Like you don't have to share that, but have you been thinking about some practical ways that you're going to evaluate how this is done? Um, because otherwise, they're going to go to the hardwired ways. I'm not good enough.
Right,
So
right. Just
we
the
can give
default. Yeah,
default track. So
yeah.
really
It's
prompting, I
true.
think, is what I've started doing with folks is to give them different ways to look at their work, and by asking them to come up with those, because I
Okay,
know that the self doubt is going to be heavy in particular groups.
okay. So here are two things that I have done for anyone. I've never thought about it being imposter syndrome as being a constant and amplified issue for historically marginalized groups, but
It
it
can be,
makes complete sense. And we're not saying that every
no,
black leader deals with this. Some are like I'm sure President Obama
he's
deals with
probably
it,
yeah, he's
but
probably got
not
it.
like we do. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. He's like, I'll walk into a room and I'll just say what I say and everybody will think I'm great. Like, I mean, he sort of, yeah.
he's
Okay.
super cool.
Super cool, and even if he's not, he's really
Yeah,
good at letting
yeah,
us see that. So there are 2 things that I have
yeah, right.
shared before with individuals that I think are helpful that maybe are examples of what you said, like, in terms of the pre-conversation to just give people a sense of confidence in that you deserve to be able to we want you to speak, you deserve the space on the platform, and
Yeah,
I don't know what it's gonna go like, but here are 2 things that you can do to kind of combat. You're going to struggle with this. I do, about 2 hours after a presentation. It doesn't matter how well it went. I wanna throw up
right.
because I remember the 2 or 3 things that I did that were really stupid. I mispronounced these words. I used this wrong word, and the
Yeah.
dates that I referenced here, completely wrong. So if anybody with any level of insight is in that audience, they're rolling their eyes thinking, "What an idiot." Okay, so here
Say
are the
more about this. This is
right.
exactly it. Yep.
Right. So here are the 2 things that I tell people over the past little while that have been helpful, I think, for me and maybe for them. Number 1, what do you want your audience to think? What do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? 20% of think, feel, do will come in the first 2 minutes of your opening, and the 98% of it is not in the rest of the conversation. It's
Yeah.
in the last 5 minutes. People will remember how you started, and they will remember how you finish, and those memories are mostly emotions and only 10% of the content. So when you think about think, feel, and do, front load and then have a heavy, heavy ending, like just boom, 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 quick stop, leave people with the strong emotion, whatever you want it to be. Okay. So that's the first thing. If you want what think, feel, and do. And it should be a simple sentence each time. The second thing, and I know you do a version of that. So for everybody
Right. Right.
listening, believe me, that Jacob practices this all the time. So this is not for him. The second thing, although it's good reminder for me too. Let's edit this out. Okay, I'm saying a lot of that. Connor, just leave all these in so
Connor,
people
leave
can
them
say,
all in. Yeah.
yeah. So people can say, oh, they're actually working through imposter syndrome on the podcast that they're talking about imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
This is
because
so meta.
not everyone has an editor. So this might be
Yeah,
the easiest
that's right.
show for Connor just to sit back
Yeah,
and go,
that's right.
I'm not
Oh,
touching
I'm
a
just gonna
thing.
let this whole thing happen. Yeah, this car accident just play out. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Number two.
This number two, finally, number two. Adam Grant is a phenomenal researcher and author. He's got a podcast where he has great people like Malcolm Gladwell and Esther Perel on it. And it's called We Work or Work Life or something like
Work
that.
life.
And Work Life?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Adam, just so you know, Jacob got the title right. I missed it, so you don't have to return my calls anymore. Okay, so Adam does this podcast. It's really phenomenal. He's written some books. One of his early books, Givers, Takers, Give and Take? No, it's Give and Take. Oh my gosh, he's never going to talk to me again. Give and Take. And when he wrote that book, it came out in 2012, and he tells a story in it. I think it's in this, or it's in one of his presentations he did around the time, because we were having him come and speak at a couple things that we were doing. He tells a story anyway. So he's at some area. So I'm getting a lot of the features right. So please note that what I'm communicating is the
essence,
basic direction, the essence of it. But the little facts may be wrong. Oh, okay, I'm such an imposter. Here we go. He said he went to like an area like 51, Area 50, this is some Fort Bragg or something like that. And they bring all the colonels together and they give them this education development opportunity. And he comes in from Wharton University. He's been awarded so many citations on amazing leaders under 20, 30. I think he was even featured as a prominent leader under 10 years old or something. Like the guy has been on this track of brilliance for some time. And so they brought him in, the U.S. Army brought him in, or military, some branch of the military. He's talking to these colonels and he gets up and he credentials, which you've got to do. They don't know. They're not connected on LinkedIn. You don't find too many colonels on LinkedIn. They might have read his bio, maybe not. They just showed up like I do at a conference. I don't know who this guy is. I'll find out who he is if what he says is interesting. So he credentials at the front and then he goes into his content and then they do an immediate survey. And he's back in his hotel room and he's, crying in his little pillow as he's reading the surveys because it's a grown man. And I'm sure he wasn't crying. I hope he doesn't hear this. And he was upset, though, because the surveys were like, each year they get younger and younger. Where do these whippersnappers come from? They think they know everything. I'd love for them to live one day of my life before telling me how I should think or what I should do. Just this kind of very, adversarial.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next day he says, okay, so I'm going to do this differently. So the next group, the very next day, he gets up. He says, listen, I just want to acknowledge one thing before we start. The lived experience in this room is so far beyond me. It would take like 100 lifetimes for me to catch up. Your insights and your competencies, you are experts in the field. Otherwise, you wouldn't have the rank and the command that you do. All I'm here to do is to give you a little bit of information that you can use as you see fit. It may not even be necessary for your leadership style. Now, having said that, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. He credentialed, did the talk, and at the end, best session I've ever been to, where they should find more people like Adam Grant. I hope he comes back. This was really insightful. The content was exactly the same. All he did was he took advantage of another bias. And this is what I tell people, that, what do you want people to think, feel, and do? And then the other bias that you can take advantage of is something called pratfall effect. You can look it up on Wikipedia. We'll put it in the show notes too. Pratfall effect basically is the idea that if you share vulnerability with your audience, you can be set up for a good response. But there are 4 versions of this. 1, I stand up and I tell you, I don't know what, I don't have all the necessary information and credentials or whatnot. You know, you throw something out there like, I may not be the right guy for this or the right
Mhm.
woman for this, and then you don't know your stuff, people get angry, right?
Mhm.
They're like, why are you here then? Like, it's like,
You're wasting
I,
my
s-
time.
right.
Yeah.
Actually, it's shame. The first one is shame.
Mm.
They said they didn't know what they're doing. Now they're stumbling through and you're just uncomfortable. You feel shame. The next one is, I credential. I know what I'm talking about. Your content is terrible. That is anger. That's adversarial. And the content could be good, but because there's no, like, it's you credentialed up on people who feel like they might have more credentials is sort of adversarial. The third one is, I don't have the right credentials, but I have some good content. That's not bad, but people tend to not remember very much because they can't ascertain the validity of the content because you haven't credentialed correctly, right? So
Mhm.
why is a school teacher talking about astrophysics? She teaches elementary, right? Like, I don't know. Okay. The third one, this is the pratfall effect. You credential, but you share a vulnerability and then your content is solid. That's the winning effect. And pratfall effect just is when you share vulnerability, but you have competency,
Mhm.
your audience will respond much better. So those are the two things that I've shared that help combat this one bias against another.
Well, yeah, exactly. I was gonna say that it's one bias against the other, and what I think it does is it actually humanizes you because that's
Yeah.
probably the experience of
Yeah.
the listener. The
Yeah.
listener's feeling a very similar posture. I know
Yeah.
something, I don't know everything.
Yeah.
Um, and so there isn't this how to figure out the person who's talking to me because you're trying to read them and you can really they've just told you right up front that we're going to jump into
Mhm.
this together. There's
Mhm.
almost a co-learning space that you're developing. Even if
Mhm.
95% of the talking and the content is coming from the front of the room or the space or the
Mhm.
screen,
Mhm.
I feel drawn in as a participant in a slightly different way because you're setting up a learning scaffold for me to
Mhm.
apply my own experiences against, to interpret it, to take it away. I love everything that you said. That would work, I think,
I think it would
for
too.
me.
And that's for the speaker to
Yeah,
hold in their mind what they want to think, feel, and do. The speaker must then trigger the pratfall effect by sharing some humanizing vulnerability. To me, I share two things. One, I have Tourette's syndrome. It either comes up or it doesn't. If it's not active, I don't share it. But I always share that I'm Canadian and I mispronounce words when I'm in the United States, and that works too. People are like, "Oh, he's Canadian. Okay, we'll give him a break." And that's my pratfall effect.
yeah.
The ki-
I guess the one I use is a bit self-deprecating, but it's fine because it's true. We'll get to a place I'm like, and if none of this lands, just
yeah,
remember, you heard all of this from a security guard. What did you think
yeah.
you
Yeah,
were gonna take
that's a
away?
good one. That's you I've seen you do that one,
Yeah,
and the
and people are
entire
like,
room was,
"Oh,
like, leaned in. They were like, "Oh, this guy's interesting." And there was
yeah,
no adversarial posturing going on. It's just like, "Can we have a conversation? Like, I'm gonna be real with you,
yeah,
right?" And,
yeah."
that's great. Yeah.
So, I think we've talked a lot about some really cool things. None of it helps me solve my coffee problem, where I'm probably going next and gonna be named Zach.
Well, one of the interesting parts of the conversation, and I think it's kind of as we're kind of coming to a close here, I wanted to. You had mentioned wanting to talk about this. I hadn't done any reading. You've done the research, but I did bring it up with some folks that I was driving around in the car with over the past couple days, and they said, "Well, it's interesting. You know, the white leaders could do one of two things. They could pull the lever, understanding that we all share this imposter syndrome and understanding that for certain groups of individuals, it may be more prevalent. You don't know.
Right.
And this could be leveraged against them. Like you're saying, like, it's on you. You have to work harder. This is your problem. Okay, so there's that. It could be used against people, or at least definitely thoughtlessly said, and definitely feel like it's being used against you. And then the second one is I could also, and I have been trying to do this, use my privilege to leverage up others. So I will
Right.
just expound on how amazing this person is, and I learn from them, and da, 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 and you lend that credentialing to another person. They don't have to do it themselves. And so I think that can also, in terms of a role that I can play, it's either I can be thoughtless or I can actually use it against people to hurt them. in a
Right.
more profound way than it can be used against me, I must say. Or secondly,
Yep.
I can help by taking away part of the conditions that create the imposter syndrome, which is where I have to tell you why you should listen to me. The problem then would be, why is the white guy only introducing the black speakers and
Mhm.
not, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to understand that that
Yeah,
dynamic as well.
you're solving for something and creating a different problem. But
Yeah,
that
exactly.
but
Exactly.
so I think it's worth thinking about it. It's not the cookie cutter approach, but certainly there are enough principles there that people should be taking away and saying, well, what does that mean for me in my
Yep.
space, in the space
Yep.
that I occupy or lead or whatever?
Well, this was an interesting conversation. Actually, I've thought about the imposter syndrome before because as all human beings, I've dealt with it. But I've never considered the implications for other groups of people
Mhm.
or my role in maybe helping or hurting. And so
Yeah.
this has been great insight for me.
No, it's been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Jake. See you next time.
See you next time.
This
has been
a Podstarter
production.